Making sure we are live. Okay. It
Okay.
seems we are live. Here we go. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I am very pleased and very happy to be here on very short notice with Professor Jack Goldstone, who is my colleague at the Schar School of Policy and Government at George Mason University. Thank you very much, Jack, for accommodating this quick interview on short notice.
Yeah, there's a lot happening this week, of course.
Absolutely. Let me just say a couple of words about Jack. Jack Goldstone is the Virginia and John Hazel Professor of Public Policy at George Mason University, a Global Fellow at the Woodrow Wilson Center in Washington, D.C., and a Senior Fellow at the Mercatus Center. He has won major prizes from the American Sociological Association, the International Studies Association, and the Historical Society for his research on revolutions and social change, and has won grants from the MacArthur, J.S. Guggenheim, and Andrew Carnegie Foundations, the U.S. Institute of Peace, and the National Science Foundation. Goldstone has authored or edited 13 books and published over 150 articles in books and scholarly journals. His latest books include Why Europe, The Rise of the West, 1500 to 1850, um, and Political Demography, How Population Changes Are Reshaping International Security and National Politics, and last but not least, Revolutions, a very short introduction. And that is a book that a lot of people in academia and beyond read, including lots of my students when they are working on anything that smells of revolution. Welcome, Jack, and very happy to have you with us to talk about the fourth in a series, actually the fifth in a series of discussions and conversations on the 2020 elections and whatnot. This particular edition is titled "The Transition." So I promised you that I will not take up a lot of your time. So I have a couple of questions dealing with the transition. First, based on a lot of what you have written, as I just mentioned, on revolution specifically and disorder, do you expect a smooth and peaceful transition of power in the United States today? And I know this sounds a little tongue in cheek because we know that it doesn't seem to be very smooth.
Well, earlier this week, I was in a bit of a panic about this because I saw things happening that if I saw them in any other country would have led me to say, no, we're not getting a smooth transition. What did I see? I saw the head of the Defense Department and top lieutenants being replaced. I saw the Attorney General authorizing investigations into the regularity of votes. I saw a person who had clearly lost an election claiming that he had won. These sound like authoritarian regimes that are trying to hold on. Fortunately, a few days have settled, and I'm no longer quite so worried. I say that because today we really started to see a wave of Republican leaders call on Trump to say, let's move the transition along. They're trying to tell him nicely he's got to go. And he's even starting to talk about what he'll do on the way out. Will he run again in 2024? Will he pardon, give out of jail free cards to some of his family and supporters and maybe himself? Any of that we'll have to see. But the good news is more and more people are talking as if his departure is a accomplished fact. And that is very reassuring compared to where we were just a few days ago. I'll even add that as we look more and more at the election outcome, it looks, if not like a landslide, a really significant and indisputable victory for the Democratic candidate, Joe Biden. He has beaten Trump in a large enough number of states that there's no one state or two state where changing the result would make an overall difference to the outcome. And in every state where he's ahead by at least 10,000 votes. usually a 0.5% of the vote or more. So that also is reassuring. If there was just one or two states on which everything depended, or if the margin of victory was 1/10 or 0.2% in several places, then I could see Donald Trump really digging in and trying to force his way. But we don't see that. So I think now the conditions are pretty clear for a smooth transition. It should stay that way all the way through January. I think you still have to be cautious and watch out what crazy plans may come into Donald Trump's head, because he is attracted to sometimes wild schemes. But it looks like his party wants to move him smoothly into the future, and that'll be a future where Joe Biden's the president.
Wow. Okay. So I was just doing what everybody's doing. I was watching the news to see what is going to come out of this process, and there was a lot of talk about Republican figures saying, "Let's get on with it already. Let's get with the program." Everybody knows that Biden won. Even the disputes are not going. Even if they're confirmed, they're not going to change anything because of the margin, the wide margin by which Biden was able to win. And then there was talk about pardons and how the president cannot potentially pardon himself legally, and how Pence might actually, step up if the president steps down. And I mean, this sort of like circus. Um, okay, there's a lot going on. I am glad to hear from you that you think that this is potentially not completely resolved, but there are signs that this will end up being a smooth transition, despite all of the noise that we've been hearing. What about the next year or two in terms of the repercussions and implications of this process, and what might the future portend? I mean, there's a lot of talk about active resistance. There's of course talk about a rerunning in 4 years. Of course, Trump running again. What about the next few years? Any thoughts on that before I basically get to my last question?
Yeah, I think the next 2 years are going to be quite difficult. This was not an election that united this country. Our United States are actually not very united at all. Most of the states where Trump won, he won by a large margin. Most of the states where Biden won, he won by a large margin. So we have red states and blue states kind of looking at each other, still suspicious, not understanding each other well. It's going to be very hard to get anything done in Congress. It looks like Republicans will continue to hold the Senate. And so we may have another couple of years in which government is dysfunctional, divided, and trust in government falls even more. And that's frightening as we're in the midst of a terrible pandemic and trying to fight out of an economic slump. So I think what we'll see is a lot of hope, but also a lot of disappointment and grumbling. And as we get to the 2022 election for the House of Representatives and governors, I think we'll start to see large street demonstrations. Everybody will be trying to push to get that last mile to where their party can make policy. But for the next 2 years, we'll see very little effective policy making by either party, and that will build up, I think, a real anger and thirst to try and make some breakthrough in 2022.
And I asked this question of everyone that has actually joined this conversation in during the past week, and that is, again, I keep squeezing questions before my last question, so
All right,
forgive me.
I'll be short.
Uh, what does this say? What does this episode that we are in the middle of say about the health of democracy in the United States? Of course, the fact that it can be overcome is imminent, but not just the outcome, but the actual feeling. I mean, I've been watching elections since 1984 very
Right.
closely,
Yeah.
but the feeling that there's something that is not settled. In other words, like you said early on, if you watched this happening elsewhere, it would be like, oh yeah, sure. But we're actually feeling this in the United States. This is the first time I feel this in the, and I'm not saying
Right.
I'm for this or that candidate or that I was for any of the previous candidates, but I've never had this feeling watching presidential elections in the United States. What does it mean that we all are experiencing this?
Look, democracy in the United States has been, if it were a patient, it would be overweight, out of shape, on a bad diet. And you could say we kind of just had a heart attack, but it was mild, and we've been revived. So it could have gone the other way. You know, right? It was a near thing. I think if Donald Trump had been reelected, democracy would really be in terminal decline in the United States. But why has it been kind of overweight, on a bad diet, and out of shape? We had one party, the Republican Party, that had become increasingly undemocratic in its pursuit of power because it found itself trapped kind of with a constituency that was neither diverse nor growing and was trying to figure out how to use all the levers of power to be a minority party and yet still play a dominant role. And to do that, it kind of had to push and bend the rules and take advantage of every angle. And that lowered the quality of democracy here. And then more broadly, the fact that policy has not worked for many Americans. A lot of Americans are unhappy that income inequality has grown. The opportunities for themselves and their children have declined. The meritocracy seems to have divided us into a sophisticated, have everything minority, and a lot of other people who feel that the America they knew is not the America they're living in now. So people don't trust the government. They don't trust their fellow citizens. The feeling that we're all in it together with a clear purpose has declined. And all of that is terrible for democracy. The other thing is that truth has been attacked. It's hard to have democracy if people can't agree on basic facts. If they agree on facts, they can have democratic disagreements and compromises over how do we react and what do we do. But if we don't even agree we're living in the same world, then it's very hard for democracy to function. So I think that even though we survived the heart attack, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to rebuild trust in government, to rebuild national unity, to rebuild a sense of common citizenship across different regions. And until we do that, democracy here is going to struggle.
Well, thank you. Okay, so at this
Now you're even
point,
more depressed.
look, the truth is that there is, there is some optimism that this is an opportunity, that this is
Mhm.
a particular juncture that will not reproduce politics as usual. And of course, I'll quickly ask this before we wrap up.
Yeah.
Do you think this is a critical juncture? I mean, I've also been asking a few questions that I've been asking my fellow my colleagues in the past week. Is this a
Yeah.
critical juncture where something can actually be done? You've described American democracy as being overweight and riddled with various sorts of diseases and so on, and perhaps kind of sickish. It has a lot of room. I mean, more than a lot of room for some people for improvement. Are we at a juncture where this could change if enough forces bring to bear the right pressure to move in that direction, or are we might we slip back into centrism and the reproduction of the status quo as it was with very cosmetic changes?
Yeah. I don't think the status quo as it was is an option. Our population is aging. It's becoming much more diverse. We're simply not going to go back to having a youthful, white Christian dominated society where the big problem is how to integrate minorities into that dominant culture. Now it's a whole different set of problems. It's how do you clear a way for the youth when you have this large baby boom population hanging over them, asking for pension support and such? When the growth of the economy is down to 1.5 to 2% a year instead of 3 or 4? And how do you integrate an America that's no longer white Christian majority with some minorities knocking on the door? Now it's all kinds of people from all kinds of walks of life, each with their own claim to dignity and their own view. And the risk is if we kind of fall into clashing identities and tribes, then we continue to go down the road to making our society dysfunctional. So we need something new. We can't go back. We need to kind of embrace a functioning, cooperating, united, and yet still diverse and more international society. That's going to be a lot of work. It's a tough haul, but I think it's the only way forward. There's no going back. I've lost your sound, Bassam. Technical difficulties. There we go.
It's intellectual difficulties. I didn't push the mute. I didn't unmute. So yes, I was saying that that makes a lot of sense. That yeah, the only way, quote unquote, is upward and forward, except for the fact that a significant portion of the population is not in the game for this sort of direction, and that's I guess is going to be a particular sort of struggle, and we can wait and see. So before I let you go and release you to go back and enjoy the news cycle or whatever else, uh, is the U.S. I mean, this is something that that comes up and also comes up in your own work.
Right.
Is the U.S. Uh, really exceptional, an exceptional nation?
Yeah. I think it still is, and I think it still has to be, for the very reason that there is no American identity except fidelity to our values, our Constitution, and that makes us different. We're not France or Germany, where we're united by a particular history or a language or a particular, mythic identity. Americans have always been anybody who came to America and adopted an American way of life. Now, to be sure, that was predominantly European white Christian for a long time, but that's changing. And if America says, no, we have to preserve that notion that America is a white Protestant country and that's what we need to be, well, that effort to go backward would hurt us because, in a sense, it's already too late. A majority of the children growing up in America today are not white Christian European in background. And we can't change that. We can't just say, well, we're going to try and kick out the entire population under age 15 and start over. So we have to adapt to that. But the good news is we've always been exceptionally open, welcoming, and good at integrating immigrants and people of different backgrounds. And so if we continue to be positively exceptional in that way, if we continue to be the most attractive place in the world for talent, for people from everywhere, Africa, Asia, Latin America, North America, then America will thrive. And I think that has been our destiny, to show how people of different backgrounds, different religions, different ethnicities can indeed find a common identity and common interest and work together. That to me is the American exceptionalism, but it's not it's not an exceptionalism of divine fortune where God has somehow given us a role and we're impervious to problems. We have problems, we have difficulties, and we have to get over them like any other country. If we don't build our democratic institutions, we'll lose them. In that sense, we're like every other democracy.
Well, you're optimistic, and it seems that we're headed in a linear direction towards making this work, quote unquote. But there is ample
Linear with
reason.
wiggles. I said
Sorry.
linear with wiggles. I said linear with wiggles.
Yeah, but there's ample reason to actually think that the progress has been. I mean, it's 2020, and just a few decades ago, we still had fundamental problems in terms of equality, whether it's
Right.
race or even gender, and now we see a huge struggle looming, which one wonders if it's going to be simply civil, and of course that's the hope. But so from a less optimistic perspective, in terms of the destiny of the United States, what could and that's literally the last question because we do have to
Okay.
let you go. What could derail this sort of optimism and linearity with obstacles? If you had to look at one or two factors that you think might derail that, not because
Sure.
of wishful thinking, but because
No,
of
no, absolutely.
caution.
Look, the biggest risk is fear. People who are fearful will embrace a strong authoritarian government, and there's plenty to fear in terms of change. Other countries are rising in the world. America is not automatically dominant the way it was for the half century after World War II. The composition of our population is changing. It's becoming younger, more diverse, more gender fluid. People fear that change if they're not used to it. The pace of technological change scares people. What kind of jobs are they going to have in the future? Will they be safe? And people in the United States, lots of them, are scared of socialism. You say that word, and they say, oh, that's going to destroy my life. You can't have socialism in America. Even if a lot of things that are important for their life, like health insurance and government to provide parks and clean air, fits into that overall framework. So people are afraid of bogeymen. They're afraid of change. And a government that does not work to allay those fears, to make people comfortable with change, to help them feel government is on their side, then they're going to fear government as well. And at that point, democracy is in trouble. We're in trouble. So that's, the simple answer is fear can destroy everything. We need people to feel comfortable and trusting toward each other, toward their government, and then we can get back on that wiggly upward line. Got to unmute.
I was told earlier at a conversation that I was having that I'm breathing heavily. And I
Okay.
kind of didn't want this to distract. Okay, so this sounds, optimistic, and I hope it is correct. I fear that the challenges ahead and the unknowns ahead are ominous. If we look at, for instance, just one factoid, the number of militias that have emerged in the past 4 years, mostly on the right, okay, the nationalist or hyper nationalist or whatever we want to categorize them as, has grown by more than 8 or 9 fold, and people are arming themselves, which is kind of odd to hear. I mean, we talk to people, like, sort of neighbors, and they tell you, yeah, I know somebody who's actually buying arms, and we're like, what? I mean, so it's I don't know, maybe that's too alarmist, and maybe this is just a function of what is happening today. But I hope that the truth is closer to your prognosis, and thank you so much for joining me again on such short notice. And I cannot say that I'll see you in the hallway of the university, because I'm not
In a few
sure.
months.
Sorry?
In a few months.
In a few months. I'll see you in the hallways, and have a wonderful day. And we'll probably be in conversation again. Thanks, Jack.
All right, Sam. Thank you very much.
Take care.